So what directing my first feature film taught me about film sales is quite a lot of things, because when we were setting up first film that I directed, obviously I'd been doing film sales for a while now, so there were a lot of things that I also kept in mind outside of just the creative vision. And I think it is important to balance out what you want creatively to what you need business-wise, because no matter what anyone says, it's still also a business. It's both creative and a business. If not, then you won't have much of a career, because you're not going to get funding again, or you're not going to make your investors money back, or both. And if you want a career, you need to make your investors money back. So it allows you more creativity to be smart on the business side of it. And I think that's really important for any filmmaker to realize when they're making their first film, that they also think about it. It still means, of course, cast who fits the best in the role, but if you have let's say two people that are equal, and a distributor gives you more sales, and they're both fairly equal, then maybe you pick the one that gives you more sales in that situation. These are just the realities. In an ideal world, and I guess an idealistic world, you wouldn't need to worry about any of that, right? But if you want to actually build a business, build a career in filmmaking, you do have to worry about that. So what it taught me when I was casting for this, we had these things in mind. So obviously we had a couple of things that are important, this being a tennis film. One, the people that were playing tennis and the main actors playing tennis, they actually had to play tennis. To me, one of the biggest things, not only creatively, because creatively I want it to be authentic, being a tennis player myself, I want the tennis to be authentic, and I don't like a lot of these films that are out there that basically have actors that have never played tennis before, and it looks terrible. So I know I didn't want that creatively, but also from a business and marketing side, I knew that as an indie, I'm not trying to compete with challengers, so Zendaya's challengers or something, which, by the way, the tennis looked horrible. I knew I didn't want, we wouldn't do that. We don't have the budget for that. I know my audience, my first audience, my primary audience is tennis people. It's the tennis people like myself, like a lot of friends that I know, a lot of people that are actual tennis players. So I want to make the film that tennis players will also see and be like, oh, they have real tennis players. That looks like real tennis there. So it was important from a business side to also get that right, so that I could market it towards those people correctly, and that they want to see it too. So that was super important. That was one of the first things that was, a factor. Then when we went into the casting actors, it's like names were definitely thought about, and we did end up casting some names. What happened at one point, I was having to decide between, this was a completely different role, but we already had a name attached at this point. Then we had the option to attach a second name, or a little bit less of a name, still a name, but a little bit less of a name in terms of sales, but the better actor and also more prestige actor, I want to say. It was hard we were thinking about it, and we were like, okay, this other actor maybe gives us more sales and because of his name recognizability, but he wasn't as good for the role. And so we did end up deciding there for the actor that fit the role way better, and it was a stronger actor. And I think that was the right decision. But the only reason we had the luxury of deciding that is because we already had one of the other roles where we did have a name actor that already gave some sales. So we didn't need to double down on that. And I think this makes it better film, which again adds to the sellability, but we still also kept in mind that we need some recognizable actors in that way, which we have. So I think it's always a balancing act. That's the biggest thing too. It's like you can't just purely go all the time of what creatively makes the most sense. You have to balance it out. And another thing that I learned, or that I knew already, but that I definitely learned, is you gotta know this beforehand. So many filmmakers that I know, they start after they make the film, they start thinking about sales. It's actually kind of crazy. Like the amount of people that I meet that don't know anything about sales, but they completed their film. It's like you should be learning that before you even make your first film. This is not a separate thing, it's an intertwined thing. So it's really important to know that you're responsible for the film as the filmmaker, not just creatively. You are responsible for everything, the people, the money, the time, everything is your responsibility, and sales falls under that responsibility. Making your investors your money back falls under that responsibility. That is all part of your responsibility, and it all needs to be intertwined. I think that's kind of a lesson that not everyone always wants to hear, especially filmmakers, because it's not necessarily just creative. It is thinking about the business side, but it is essential. Another thing that it really forces you to see in directing and sales, it can go the bad way too. Like we made the right decision in my opinion, and we didn't suffer any negative consequence. But imagine that if I would have fully made decisions based on business, like maybe if I would have cast some influencer or would have cast the name that wasn't as good for the role and would have done a worse job, it would have just been a worse film, and kind of the film falls apart then, potentially. It can also go negative the other way when you lean too much the business way. And we see this in some studio films even now, where they're trying to make decisions purely based on business. No one wants to watch that either. So I'm not advocating for being fully on the business side either and only thinking of that. I also think that's not a good situation either. And you still need to make something that a good film, things that people want to see. So I think balancing that is the tricky thing, and that's the hard thing, especially if you're directing as well, like I did here, or producing as well. You're trying to balance that. You're not trying to, in my opinion, you're not trying to go 100% either way. You're trying to balance it out where you make the best movie possible, but you're still keeping in mind sales and the business side in things that you can. And look, it's a really tricky thing. It's really hard to know if you're doing it completely right, but I think if you're thinking about it and you're keeping this in mind, you're more bound to do the right thing and do the good job with that than some filmmakers that don't think at all about the business side. I don't think that's the way to go. Or people that only think about the business side and aren't thinking about creative. I think both those are not great ways to go. But I think asking all that is really important. Then the other thing I think that it shows you from a sales perspective too is that you need to direct with budget in mind, which means sometimes you're not able to always get as much coverage as you want because you don't have enough time on your schedule and you don't have enough dates, right? But it is important sometimes to not think like, oh, I wish I had $5 million, because maybe your movie would definitely not make its money back at that budget level, depending what your movie is. So it is important to direct a movie and make a movie that the budget is appropriate to what it can make back realistically as well. You know, like the number that we made it for, I know we can make back for sure. Like I can self-distribute that and without an official distributor. I mean, I'll do it through my distribution company myself, but I could literally self-distribute that and feel pretty good about making that back with our marketing plan. That's great. So that gives me a safety net in terms of I know that this is not such a huge amount that I can't make it back. And I think, especially if you're a first-time director or even if you're just making an indie film, if it's a drama, I think figuring out what can you get for free, like location-wise, what can you do to cut this budget way down so that you have a chance to actually recoup this budget. I think that's really important in a sales perspective as well. So I think just from everything that I've said, one of the big lessons that I learned is balancing the business side and the creative side. I think that's essential. Also making sure, as important as it is to think about that in casting, also just making sure that everyone is aligned on the story. It is way better to find the right actor, and there's so many actors that can add some value on a sales perspective. But it's so important to also get people that are aligned with your story, that everyone's telling the same story, that they're not in it just for a paycheck or anything like that. So I think that is important because it does start with making a good film. But I think saying that, I think it's important that people realize it starts with that. That's just giving you a shot. You know what I mean? It's not just make a good film and everything will take care of itself. That's not the case anymore. I think that's really important for everyone to realize, is that the starting point is making a good film, and then everything else becomes as important, like sales, marketing, how you're getting it out there. All that stuff becomes as important. And I think that's a kind of sometimes a rude awakening for filmmakers, because I still see it, still like this thought process that if you make something great, they'll come type of thing. I don't think that's the case. There's way too many filmmaker decks that I still see sent to me where it's literally their distribution strategy is get into Sundance or some big festival and go from there. And it's like, that's not a strategy at all. And if I was an investor in that film, I would be very worried if that's their strategy. Actually having a marketing strategy, having a plan, and I'll share in the next videos like kind of more an in-depth strategy that we're doing here, just to give you an example. But I think it needs to be detailed, and you need to be able to do it in different ways. What can you do guerrilla style? So in the sense of what can you do almost for free with sheer effort, and what can you do for less money and little money? So I think having all that, and I'll share that next video, is how to do that is super important. And it'll probably help you get investors too, because then they know their money's getting taken care of by someone that cares about the back end and the business side. A lot of people don't. So if you do, you'll be far ahead of a lot of filmmakers that only thinking about the creative and just getting it made. So I think overall, I don't think film sales, business, distribution, marketing, I don't think that's separate from directing at all. I think the future is for filmmakers that are able to kind of think about all of it and treat it creatively, but also as a business, and how to figure that out, and that are open to learning that. You don't have to know that right away, but you have to be able to want to learn it and adjust, and that's kind of what we're doing here. So I'm gonna keep you guys updated on everything goes with Wildcard and what we do, and I'm gonna keep sharing our plan and how it goes and the results and everything. So, you know, subscribe, let me know in the comments any questions you have, and like always, if you have something you want me to cover, I'm happy to cover it.